life is meant to disrupt us and transform us. Absolutely. If you think a simple thing like if I'm breathing normally and then I just, as a practice, as a spiritual practice, hold my breath slightly and then exhale completely, that's a disruption of the old pattern. But it's meant as a way to start orienting us in a new direction. So life is meant to disrupt us. Life is meant to trigger us. I hate that, but it's true. So that we can become more of who we're meant to be.
My name is Francesca Phillips, and you're listening to the Good Space Podcast, a show where we help you find peace and power in work, relationships, and intuition. Welcome to the Good Space Podcast. Today, we have an exciting conversation with Deirdre Fay. She works with people who have crummy histories to develop an inner platform for success to get their needs met for life. With decades of experience as a psychotherapist and educator, Deirdre brings together modern neurobiology and ancient wisdom into a practice of what she calls being safely embodied, which you know we love meshing those two worlds together on the Good Space. So this is going to be extra special for you. Deirdre's message resonates deeply with those who may look successful on the surface, but internally they may be plagued with shame, anxiety, distress, depression, and they're wondering why they're stuck in these repeating patterns. Experts in the field have described her practical methods as a radically positive approach to healing trauma and a way for people to get better faster. She's also the author of Becoming Safely Embodied, a guide to organize your mind, body, and heart to feel secure in the world. Deirdre, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Francesca. It's just an honor to be here.
I'm so glad our paths crossed because I think I watched some YouTube videos and just saw what you did. It's like, yes, you belong on this show, and I'm so glad you decided to be here. A lot of people who are listening to this show, they're definitely those high achievers, they're ambitious, but they also want to have that spiritual connection so they can still have peace in their life. Before we dive into what I want to talk about what to do when you're triggered and then also shame, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you decided to do what you're doing?
Well, I went in my 20s and lived in a yoga ashram. This was back in the 80s. And during that time, it was a safe environment. People were wonderful. I was working out all the time, doing yoga, meditation every day, training for triathlon. So I was really in my body. And then I went and did a workshop. And during that workshop, I did the demo with somebody. And this unknown trauma history came up and blew me out of the water. And after that, I had to put the pieces back together. And I didn't realize what happened to me? How come I was one way before and this way after? And how do I get back to that? Or how do I integrate it? So that was my quest. And at about that time was when trauma treatment was just beginning. And so I was kind of feeling my way around it. And there certainly wasn't anything about yoga and meditation and trauma. So I was really how do I do this? How do I put myself back together again? Like Humpty Dumpty who fell off the wall. I was like, oh. So I really just started studying the scriptures, the ancient texts, and I started asking a lot of questions and just being in an exploration inside myself. And the kind of the secret at the time was that there were a lot of people who were coming to our ashram and doing trainings and workshops who had trauma histories, but nobody talked about it. It was shameful at that time. It still is for many people. But at the time, it really was it was bad. You had to hide it from the world. And I just started how do I put this back together again? And that was my study and my course of action. Got into therapy to help with that. Would continue doing long silent retreats, but was trying to figure out how do I stay connected when I was meditating or when I was doing a lot of postures and what was coming up. So I left there, and then I was getting my social work degree, and I was doing an internship at one of the major U.S. training hospitals, and somebody heard that I had lived at the ashram. So they asked me to come and teach the people in the dissociative units, trauma dissociative units, at night on my own time. And I was completely game to do that because it was about giving back. How can I take what I'm starting to put together and offer it back. And along the way, somebody else told Bessel van der Kolk about the work I was doing, who's one of the premier figures in the world and on trauma. And he asked me to come and join them at their trauma clinic. So I did. And while I was there, I started putting together this core group I called Becoming Safely Embodied. This very simple skills, very concrete. And then started leading them in my practice. And my colleague, Janina Fisher, who was one of my closest friends at the time, kept sending clients to it, and people kept getting better. And she was like, how are they getting better faster? What are you doing? So she came and started co-leading the groups with me to see and learn. And we just had a ball. We just kept, there was people wanted 10 weeks and they wanted more and more. Finally, it would be like 24 weeks long. And then they wanted another year and another year. So it was really about how do you develop yourself inside? How do you train yourself to live inside your own skin? So that's the whole approach that I take. And along the way, then I develop what I call a transformational model, which integrates attachment theory, trauma treatment, and the ancient wisdom traditions to really just help us see how do you get from here to here and close the gap so you feel solid, steady, and secure inside.
There's so much I want to pick out of what you said because it's so powerful and I felt it on such a deep level. So the first thing that came to mind though is for anyone listening who might not understand, like, what does that mean, trauma? Can you explain what that looks like, feels like, how can someone know that they're experiencing trauma?
Well, there's a whole spectrum to that word, from the very simple adult onset trauma of like, you get in a car accident, but you don't have anything else, any other trauma in your life, to war victims, to sex trafficking, and all the way to the very more serious kinds of trauma, which we call it on the dissociative scale, the dissociative identity disorder. That's really on the far end. But that whole spectrum along there is when you feel like something so massive has happened to you and it feels life-threatening and you feel like you can't quite recover. We have learned over the years that the reason why trauma doesn't heal is because of the underlying attachment issues. So over and over, we've been learning you can't just heal the trauma necessarily. You have to be able to help somebody build a self inside so that they can be with whatever comes, so that life comes through and rises, crests, and falls instead of sticking to you like a Gumby or something.
That's great. I that analogy of Gumby is funny, but to bring it back into the context of like the good space and someone who's listening from, our audience, tell me if this is right or wrong. But I remember there was a time in my life where I was working in the music industry. I was doing really well, learning, growing, like in the thick of things. And then a few not traumatic experiences happened, but experiences happened where it made me feel uncomfortable. It made me question what I was doing. And eventually I decided to leave it. And I remember for years, like at least 6 years, I had this emotional block towards music, towards going after things that you desire. And I feel like because I didn't properly process it or forgive it, and there was shame attached to it, it stayed inside me for so long. And so it wasn't until, years later, I looked back and I said, why can't I be that woman again? Who's so free, who goes after what she wants, who gets excited by the work that she's doing. And when I saw who I was before, that's when I started asking questions, like you said. And then I realized there was stuck emotional trauma that I had to work through. And so is that what you're talking about when you mentioned you looked back and said, oh, how can I get back to that again?
Pretty much. It's like everything in life, if we think about those of your people who practice yoga, everything in life is about prana flowing, the life force flowing. We think of it in terms of an acorn becoming an oak tree, or a little infant, in the belly, then becoming a little toddler, becoming a teenager, an adult. It's like everything is meant to grow, develop, and flourish. But what happens psychologically is when we're reaching out toward life and exploring life and something happens, we either have what I call an attachment shock, a little freeze response, or we get into an anger situation where we fight against it, or we freeze and we try to run away from it. or we become a good girl and we fawn and we become all compliant. So we have all these different strategies around it. But what tends to happen when we adopt any of those strategies, like not wanting to engage with anything for a long period of time, we create a separation between what happened and where we are now. And that's what needs to get linked up. And like you said, it becomes uncomfortable or disturbing, or that feeling was so big that it didn't rise, crest, and fall. It didn't move through. It didn't grow, develop, and flourish and die and end, right? So we have to go back, and not go back in a bad way and dig around in it, but just say, okay, I'm here and that happened. And how do I become big enough inside so that old stuff can just come up and pass through? And it's really that simple, and it's that complicated. It's very hard to do because we get afraid. We become phobic of our internal experience.
Absolutely. I remember when I finally had that moment with myself. The weird thing is that there were a few times where I thought I had gotten over it and I thought I'd figured it out. And then I'm like, why am I still feeling this way? But then there was that moment where I had to accept it, like truly embody and accept what had happened and remove the shame from it. And then, like you said, when you focus on aligning with abundance and having that clear energy, it's almost like I had to have a true love for myself, regardless of like what attachments I had from trauma or whatever. And then I think it was like I had a dream or something. And I remember waking up and I had a tear that just came down, and it wasn't like a tear that I'd ever had before. It was warm, and it just was the singular tear, and it felt like a release. And I'm like, that's what I was looking for. It was the craziest experience.
When those moments happen, it's like everything falls into place and we realign inside. And that's precious. Those times are precious. And that is what's meant to happen if we're around people that are safe and supportive and nurturing, where we can let on that we're going through this. And for many people, they don't have that. Or what tends to happen is we grow up, get older, we start being professional in the world, and we present a certain face. And in that face out there, you're not supposed to let on that you got a problem in here. And so that inner divide, that split happens more. And so I present out here, but internally I'm this way. And it deepens the divide. The more I spin in that I can't, I shouldn't, nobody wants to hear, the more I push this away inside. And that just complicates it. So it sounds like, Francesca, what you did though is, and I think this is what is so healing, is you created an internal experience of safety and nurturance slowly, where you could then be that facilitating environment outside that allow the linking to happen. And if we're lucky enough to have that with other people, we call that a safe haven to return to, then we're really lucky. But otherwise, we can do it inside ourselves.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I hadn't felt safe within myself for so many years. And I believe 100% in what you're doing of being safely embodied, and especially for me personally, having that sense of safety within myself. And that meant loving all parts of me, shame and all, flaws and all, like knowing that I'm worthy and, worthy, I guess enough is the word I was thinking of, regardless, like just as I sit here right now, I'm worthy and enough. And yeah, I think it was very powerful. So if someone knows that they have a trigger or a wound, I guess triggers and wounds can be different things, but say like, I know I'm being triggered in real time. What do I do? What's the action steps?
That's a great question, and it's important. So what I do, I created this model I call the transformational model. And it takes in all the attachment research. But the basic idea is when something happens and I'm triggered, I'm recognizing that I'm protesting against something. It's like something's not right. We all know this, right? Inside, something says, this isn't right. It shouldn't be like that. What is it inside? Like what knows it shouldn't be like that? That's the wisdom we want to tap into, because that wisdom says it shouldn't be like that. What should be like? So if I don't feel safe and I'm angry or upset or frozen about not feeling safe, something inside, some deep wisdom says, I should feel safe. Where did that come from? I love that inquiry. How do we know that our native way of being is not to be afraid, but to be safe and loved and cared for? Like, that was mind-boggling when I first started thinking that. And it was from that place that I started realizing when we're protesting against something, it's because we need something. But most of us have disowned our needs. We're ashamed that we have needs like needing safety, belongingness, reassurance, guidance and mentoring, people delighting in us, dealing with conflict, having mentoring and breaking down a big task into small steps and learning how to not take life personally. If we didn't know that those were normal things, like every kid should know that they're loved and feel safe to love, or everyone should know that how to calm themselves, how to have emotional regulation, like those are normal things that we all should have. But when we don't get it, we're like ashamed of ourselves. We think something's wrong with me that I don't know how to do that. And that's what we start tucking away further and further and further. So the protest is there. The trigger is how should I call it? It's like an alarm bell that says something's not right here. What is it you need? So recognizing your trigger, what is the protest? What's the unmet need? And that can be hard because it's usually shame laden. And so we have to have some space around it. But then it's like, what would I rather have? I call it the nourishing opposite. What would be more nourishing, more supportive, more life fulfilling? Okay, but then how do I get there? And what we start to see as I start moving toward that, it's like everything in me goes, oh no, this is something scary. Let's get back to our comfort zone. Let's make it safe again. And safe is usually the old way of doing it, but it's not the life enhancing way. And so it's that battle that goes on. The first battle is, I hate this, it shouldn't be like this. And the second is like, oh no, am I going to be safe as I step out of my comfort zone and reach for something better? And learning how to navigate and surf that turbulence is a whole skill to be learned. But once people get like that there's protest, that triggers are trying to point them in the right direction, when they normalize their needs, they begin to say, oh, it's okay. This wisdom inside this saying, take that step. It's like, oh, okay. And then the work that I do is really just about helping people notice all that, but make the next step so granular that it's a no-brainer. So it doesn't invite more threat as they reach for something new and different.
What do you recommend are those granular steps to start trusting yourself? It's
very individual, and we have to learn how to do it. So let's just take a simple thing. People say, well, I want to love. I want to be loved. It's such a global comment that people have. Well, being loved is a huge thing. So how do we make it more granular? How does being loved look like, feel like, taste like, smell like, feel like to you? And how is it different from somebody else? And how do you start orienting in that direction instead of the old one? And so you break that apart to smaller and smaller and smaller bits, so you can actually construct what we call a new representation and move towards something new. I was just talking to somebody just today, and she said something that was like, I wish I could remember what it was that she said. And I was like, this is exactly, let me see if I can pull it up. She had a core memory of looking at her mom and saying, this can't be my mom. This can't be right. It's learning. When you trigger that, it's like, okay, what would a mom be like that would be better? You know, if the music industry environment you were in wasn't right, what would it have been right? You know, what would safety look like? What would it sound like? How would people look if they're in that safe environment? How would they interact with you? So you begin really training your body, mind, and heart to orient to this new.
I'm glad you brought this up, because what it sounds like is kind of looking at the environment that you're in, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and then seeing what would that environment look like to get this need of mine met. And it reminds me of, actually, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was on a Clubhouse room. It's like, everyone's listening to conversations. It's an audio only app. And I'll never forget this one woman who was speaking. So she was a moderator, she was leading the room, and someone had said that they were having problems at work or something to that effect. And she said, don't think that you're the problem. A lot of times it's the environment that's the problem. And I remember when she said that, it just like lit this fire in me, because for most of my life, I thought I was the problem. And you just touched on that again, where it's like, actually, it could just be the environment.
Well, it's often in interaction. Like there's a hole in us or an imprint in us that's a perfect match for the icky environment on the outside. Otherwise, we wouldn't be vibing in it. I think of it like a jukebox. I don't know if you remember jukeboxes. They were there in my day. If you put E6, you get some country tune that's like melancholy and sad. You press C12 and it's upbeat and happy. It's the same thing. Our external environment is triggering or a fit for this internal environment, but we can change that. That's the beauty of it. The research is very clear about it, that we can change that. But what happens is we get stuck in it and we spin it over and over again. And then we feel trapped and we feel doomed. And it's so not the case. I feel like that's my life's mission. That is not the case. We can totally repattern ourselves and retrain our body, mind, and heart to have a different experience. And then our external world looks differently.
Do you struggle with time management and feel overwhelmed by everything you have to get done? And have you tried sticking to a regular schedule but get pulled every which way by shiny objects and demands from others? If you want to simplify your life and get better at being decisive, finally getting productivity down in your life, then this message is for you. I have released a new book called How to Not Lose Your Shit, the ultimate productivity guide for entrepreneurs. This book gives all the methods that I have taught my private clients, my followers for many years, on how to see results in your business and to get more peace in your life. I've had so many entrepreneurs say how overwhelmed they feel and drained and burned out. And so I teach them a framework and different techniques that help them to take back their peace and to start loving running their business again and to start feeling human again. If any of this sounds like you and any of it sounds good to you, then make sure you buy this book now. It is workbook style, so it's a roadmap, and it gives you a link as well to a download that you can easily print and use as you're implementing everything in the book. And it's very short. It's probably like 60 to 70 pages. So it's very short because I only wanted to give you information that was actually useful to you. And I throw in a few stories as well from people that I've worked with. So a lot of good things in there. Make sure you buy it now if this sounds like something you need. And if you have any questions, feel free to direct message me or email me. And I hope it helps. What are some things you recommend people to do to start feeling the better energy or the energy that they want to step into?
Simple things like look and see, well, what is it you want? Okay, well, let's say love. I want love. Okay, well, what would love look like today? Might be different tomorrow. And how, instead of, like, if you're going out for a walk, what do you look like? How does love look like out there? And how do you hang out with that and let your body savor it? Because that's the other trick. It's not, we can't just get it cognitively. We have to literally, I call it heart bathing, bathe our body, mind, and heart in this new experience. So if you want safety, well, safety feels like my viscera can release. Okay, so go for a walk and see what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel loved. You see maybe even just a mother and a daughter out there, and they're playing and having fun, and you go, oh, isn't that adorable? You want to hang out with, how do you hang out with that over and over? Because we know that our nervous system starts switching gears every 17 seconds. But if we're not continuing that 17 seconds, 17 seconds, 17, we're going to go back to the old way. The more you marinate in it and savor and just delight in that experience without the content necessarily, your body says, that's what I want. I want more of that. And that begins the process of change.
For me in New York City, petting dogs, that to me makes me feel that wash of love. And like sometimes when I'm really stressed at work, I just think of a cute dog. I'm like, oh.
Exactly. There you go, Francesca.
Yay.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great practice. And one other thing too, I remember that changed a lot for me was I no longer said, I'll take a break or work out or eat lunch after I do A, B, and C. It's, I'm going to eat lunch, I'm going to work out, and I'm going to take a walk or whatever. And then I can get to whatever work I need to do. So even that switch in order changed so much for me because I realized I was putting everything else before my mental and physical health. And I was using all of those things as a way to like feel like I deserved.
What perfect example, and it's not about becoming narcissistic and totally self-absorbed. It's just being aware of like, I need some just basic goodness so that I can then have, try a little harder. In fact, we know this from couples research, a researcher named John Gottman at the University of Washington. He put couples in what he calls the love lab and for 24 hours, and he monitored everything about them. And he had these grad students coding everything. And one of the key results that always fascinated me is that for every small, non-helpful comment or interaction between a couple, if that couple had 5 positive things or 5 better feeling things to buffer that one, they were a couple that was going to last over time versus the couples that didn't. And those were the couples that broke apart or divorced. And I thought, if that's the case between people, it's certainly what we're doing with ourselves. Think of all the negative stuff. Like you gave that beautiful example. I've got to work. I've got to do this. I've got to, at my to-do list is so strong. But what if I said, okay, right now I'm just going to like enjoy the puppy in the park, just like see it wagging its tail, like, oh my God, that's so great. Go for the gym. And then I have that buffer inside to handle the stress of the next piece of work that I have to do as well.
That's a brilliant connection you made. Brilliant. Because I've heard of that study before and I never would have thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. Because how can I trust myself if my body doesn't know the next time it's going to be taken care of, because all these other things are just overloading my emotional energy and all of my time. And so it's great. And you're right. The times that I have put myself in that, like you said, that washing over of that good feeling, I actually am more productive, quicker, and I produce better product when I am putting those things first. So yeah.
So great to be with you. It's wonderful. I love it when there's a syncing up.
Yes, me too. And I wanted to make sure that we also touch on shame, because I feel like when you add that onto other triggers and things, it can kind of muck things up.
Absolutely. It's a horrible physiological response that cripples us.
So can you share why shame is an attachment wound and how to transform it?
My thinking about this came from my own experience of growing up with a lot of shame and just like dying with shame a lot of the time. And I talked to expert after expert, I read and nothing seemed to work for me until I really took a deep dive into the attachment research. And that's where I put these pieces together. If I need to be loved and nobody's out there loving me, I'm going to feel like there's something wrong with me. If I reach for, and this is just a body-based thing, we see this with kids. A kid, it's like, crying and wanting help and reaching with their hands. And if somebody ignores them or tells them to shut up or big boys don't cry or whatever it is, it collapsed down. And that normal need for reassurance, love, value, respect, whatever it is, gets shut down. And that is the shutting down of that basic attachment need for love, value, respect, care, connection. And it lives in the body as something's wrong with me. And we know that because the brain, usually these are encoded before we're 3 years old. So the brain doesn't develop in the same way. It doesn't have a narrative memory. It's a feeling memory. So it's encoded as, something's wrong without the thought. And then we grow up and we're still holding that, like, oh my God, that deep physiological panic or fear or distress or the blowing volcano feeling inside that there's something wrong with us. But if we normalize that, say, of course I needed to be loved. Of course I needed to be respected. Of course I needed contact right there. Of course I want my husband, wife, partner, whatever to X, Y, and Z. Like, that's normal. Over time, the system starts melting away that shame. But it is a painful dilemma.
I appreciate how you described that, because I've definitely felt that exact sensation. I just wouldn't have been able to describe it as well as you did, where when you allow yourself basically breathing room, like, of course it's okay I feel this way. Of course it's okay that I want these things. And you're right. I used to feel so wound up, and I still struggle with anxiety a little bit, but since I've worked on that story that I tell myself in that conversation, I have definitely felt that loosening and just that relaxing. And I've been sleeping better and relating, to my husband better and being present with him. And those are other things that I want to work on, is being present in the moment and not somewhere else all the time. And I feel like focusing on that shame has helped in all of those other areas. It's kind of unbelievable how it can be at the root of so many things.
Right. Just frees you up. Good. I'm so glad you've had that.
Thank you. Do you still find yourself having to work through things, or?
Oh, sure. I kind of got to a place where I thought, okay, well, you know what? This is just it's a way of living, to be not like introspective to the point of ignoring the world, but just like, of course, something's going to happen. And of course, I'm going to learn and grow and develop from it. And then I'm going to keep flourishing. But of course, the next thing's going to happen. And then I'm going to grow and develop from that. This is normal. It's normal. That's what's supposed to happen.
So it's almost like most of us have been conditioned to think the anxiety and the shame and the triggering is normal. But instead, you're just reorienting your perspective and where you're coming from. So it's like something's going to be happening in your mind and body anyway. So why not make it the way that our spirit is meant to be? And that is, like you said, just noticing, being aware. And everything that you mentioned too reminds me of having that connection to body. Like, you're not dissociated from feeling. Because I've noticed that in myself too, where like with anxiety, you're just in your thoughts and you're attaching to these thoughts, which meditation teaches. You think of like clouds floating in the sky. We're not meant to really grab them or identify with them or stop them. You just let them float by. But most days I'm tempted to not. I just want to grab onto them and like identify with them. And so that can disconnect you from your body, and actually getting in your body and using the spirit uses those emotions. It uses those sensations to communicate with us. And so using that to work with yourself rather than against it is what I'm gathering from everything.
Well, that's why I call it a transformational model. Life is meant to disrupt us and transform us. Absolutely. If you think a simple thing, like if I'm breathing normally, and then I just, as a spiritual practice, hold my breath slightly and then exhale completely, that's a disruption of the old pattern. But it's meant as a way to start orienting us in a new direction. So life is meant to disrupt us. Life is meant to trigger us. I hate that, but it's true. So that we can become more of who we're meant to be.
I want to make sure we grab that piece that you said, where life is meant to disrupt and transform. I think that's very powerful. Would you say in Becoming Safely Embodied, do you teach this in more depth, or what would this be perfect for? If someone's like, I'm on board listening to Deirdre, like, sign me up.
Well, certainly my book has the Becoming Safely Embodied. My previous book was more of a clinical book, but it's I have to say, I get a lot of feedback that's beautifully written, which pleases me to death. It's called Attachment-Based Yoga and Meditation for Trauma Recovery. So that book goes into more depth about the research and the steps that are there. And then I'm writing a new book. So we do a lot of courses. We do an ongoing coaching group called Living Untriggered Coaching, where you create your own luck. So that's just really about moving forward in life, but also integrating the past so that you get more solid, steady, and secure inside.
That's wonderful. Where can listeners find you if they want to either sign up or find your books or even just on social media?
Dfay.com is my website. And if they want a discount to, at least if they're in the US, to the book, they can go to dfay.com/book. If they want to find out about our coaching group, they can go to dfay.com/LUCK, Living Untriggered Coaching.
Great. And we'll make sure to link all of that in the show notes. So it's really easy to click on over. And if there's one last thing that you either want to leave with us or something you hope that they take away today, what would you say?
To know that we want you to be as full and alive and vibrantly accessing your own heart and spirit as much as possible, that life is waiting for you. We're waiting for you. We want to know you.
Deirdre, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insight and your energy. I'm so grateful that we got to connect today.
It was a delight. Thank you, Francesca.
Now it's time for an affirmation. I am safe within myself and express myself radiantly everywhere I go. If you found today's tips inspiring or thought-provoking, share it right now on social media and make sure to tag me at Francesca A. Phillips or at Find Your Good Space, and also weigh in the comment section at findyourgoodspace.com. You can find links in the show notes. And if you have a spiritual or mindfulness problem that you want me to unpack on an upcoming The Good Space episode or an awesome manifesting story you want to share, give my podcast phone line a ring right now at 917-719-0867. Also, don't forget to download my free morning routine guide. It's what helped me reduce my anxiety, increase productivity, and so much more. The link to everything I mentioned is in the show notes. See you soon.